Hey, what's going on, guys? Pete here with MixBetterNow.com, and today we're continuing in the Mixing Drums from Scratch series. Now, if you're new to mixing drums from scratch, or if you're new to Mix Better Now in general, I would like to say welcome. I would also like to strongly urge you to go check out part 1, where I talk about some really important fundamental things like prepping the drums, getting our routing correct, and most importantly, getting our phase all in line, have it sounding good and as tight as possible. I personally use auto align for that, so you can check all of that out in part 1. But in part 2 here, we're just going to be continuing the process, and we're going to keep going further in mixing drums. All right, so we're picking up exactly where we left off last time. The only thing that I want to point out is I've done a few things differently here. I brought in the rest of the instrumentation that we sort of hid while we were going over some of the stuff last time. And I cleared out some of the dead space and some of the areas where there might have been mic bleed, or there was a full take going through and there was some noises and stuff. I didn't clean up the vocals extremely tightly. I would probably, come down here and zoom in and get rid of all this dead space. But that's not important right now, but I do want to have this stuff out and available because we're going to want to be listening to all of the other instruments as we go along and mix the drums. There's certain things that we can do in solo and, with the drums by themselves, but really it's very important that we listen to other things, at least in a very static way while we're mixing the drums, because we need to know why we're doing what we're doing. There's no point in making drums brighter or increasing low end or cutting out mids or compressing something if we're not doing that for a very specific reason. So for that, I went ahead and brought all the other stuff in and cleaned up all the dead spots. All right, so the first thing that I want to take a look at now is I want to head over to our mix bus, or the submix. I know this is confusing, but I did put a link in the description box last time for you guys to check out the video why I use 2 mix buses, and I'll just explain it again very briefly. So over here at the end of the session, all the way to the right, you could see that I have submix here, and then this is the mix bus. Okay, so in Studio One, they have a mix bus, a master fader, a 2-bus, whatever you want to call it. They have that already set up and ready to go, where it's a bit different if you guys use Pro Tools or if you're familiar with that, where you have to actually create a master fader. So this is something that for me is just carried over since I've worked in Pro Tools, and I still do some stuff in Pro Tools, but I've been working a lot in Studio One lately. So the idea is that everything comes here to this submix, and just so you know, this is a bus. All right, this is not a quote unquote master fader. This is just a bus that I send everything to, and I use a dry wet setup. So all of the processing is going to go on here on the submix on my. It is a mix bus, but I might say mix bus, but I really mean the submix. And then the mix bus over here, or the 2-bus, or whatever you want to call it, stereo out. This is where I will put stuff like metering, and this is going to be a completely clear channel path where there's going to be nothing that is going to affect the tonality of any of the drums. A big reason that I do that, which we'll probably see down the road here, is, for example, if I want to use some drum samples. Most drum samples, and this is important, guys, most drum samples come out of a pack or out of the box already processed. They are already typically EQ'd, they are already typically compressed, and what happens is, if I don't want to send those samples out through my submix, which has things like EQ and compression on it, I will just send it to the mix bus. And the reason being is I don't want to send it through another stage of EQ and another stage of compression if I already like the way that it sounds. So with that being said, we are going to put a couple things on the mix bus now. So I'm just going to kind of make these smaller here, double click on this to make it bigger. And we're going to take a peek at some things that I will implement on the submix and implement on the mix bus. And now is the time I want to do that. Last time I wanted to take care of, like I said, the prep and the routing and the phase and all that stuff. But since we're going to be doing our static mix and gain staging and pushing level into the submix, I want to have some things on there ready to go. So we'll open our little plugin window here, our browse window. And the first thing that I always put on my mix bus is the Slate VCC. I'm a big fan of it. I like the SSL setting, the new one, the Brit 4KE. I'll always put the noise reduction button in, and I'll leave the drive to where it defaults, as well as the input and the output. So we'll do that. The next thing I want to do is grab a compressor. So I'll typically use one of 3 mix bus compressors. I'll typically use an SSL G-Bus compressor, an API 2500, or a Neve 33609. And what dictates which mix bus compressor I use is essentially the type of music that we're mixing, the genre of music, the flavor of the song. So I would say the compressor for me that covers the most ground is going to be the SSL. So I'm going to grab the SSL and put it on here. I've yet to pick up the new one. I'm still using the legacy. I think it sounds great. So I'm going to pop this on here. And the other thing I want to grab is the 33609, because that's a possibility for me too. But this is a very specific sounding compressor. It has a fixed attack time of 3 milliseconds. So I'm just going to turn that off. We'll take the SSL here and we'll set it to my default mix bus setting, which is 2-to-1 ratio, 10 millisecond attack, and a 100 millisecond release. Now, I'm not going to be turning any knobs right now. I'm not going to be addressing the threshold or the makeup gain. I just want to put stuff on the mix bus that I know I might use or want to try out, stuff that I'm going to be essentially mixing into as I do this. The next thing I want to grab is going to be the Slate virtual, with all like the V, the 3-letter acronyms. I get so confused with what they all are. The virtual bus compressors, but it's going to be the rack. All right, so Slate Digital and the VBC rack. Now, the reason I use the VBC rack is not to compress. I don't use this for any compression. I simply use this as a color box to sort of enhance my audio, enhance my signal a little bit. I usually turn the FG mute off because this adds a little bit of bump at 2K, makes it brighter. We can listen to that later if you want. I don't want to talk about the mix bus too much. I've done a couple videos on that. My mix bus masterclass, I will put a link in the description box as well. You guys can go check that out. But just know that I have this on here. There's no threshold. The ratios are all 1-to-1, so nothing's happening, and that just kind of hangs out there. The next thing that I like to put on there is a little bit of EQ with one of my favorite mix bus EQs, which is the BX Digital V3 from Plugin Alliance. This thing's an absolute beast, and it just does some really incredible things, such as the mono maker here, mid-side EQ, all kinds of fun stuff. All I'm going to do is set the mono maker to 100 hertz, which is where I like it, and then I'm going to leave this alone. I do not EQ until we're a little ways into the mixing process. I will mix into a compressor, but I don't want to do any EQ moves yet. The other thing I'm going to grab is the Pultec EQP1A. And I use this for a couple different reasons. Number one, it sounds amazing on low end, it sounds amazing on the top end, but just passing, again, much like the VBC rack, just passing audio through this will in fact sweeten the sound to me. It adds a little bit of weight, adds a little bit of size, and it just sort of does a very cool analog thing. So I'm going to leave this alone for now. Going to grab 2 more things here. Something I love on the Tubus is the soft tube. It's the Drummer S73, which is basically like a little bit of parallel EQ. It'll brighten the signal. What we're going to do though is we are going to turn this off for now. I don't want this on. This is something that I may or may not blend in later. And then just for posterity's sake, let's throw a limiter on there. I'm a big fan of the Oxford limiter because of this lovely enhanced fader right here. I turn safe mode off. I make the release as fast as possible, and I usually make the attack around 100 milliseconds right there, something like that. I don't want it to clamp down extremely hard. I'll also bring the output trim down a little bit because if you push a lot of volume into a limiter, sometimes it can actually not contain it and it'll go over. But here's the trick though. I turn this off. I don't have it on yet because I want to know if I'm clipping my mix bus. I want to know if I'm clipping my drum bus or anything. just based upon how, if something lights up and I know that it's clipping, I know we're going to have to address it in gain stage, and we haven't gain staged anything yet. We haven't started to really to mix anything yet. So I'm just going to leave all of that alone, and I'm going to put one more meter here in the post section on the mix bus, which is going to be the dry mix bus. Okay, we're going to use the where is it? The Blue Cat. It is the BCDP meter Pro 4. Wow, that's a mouthful, huh? This is another great meter that I like a lot, and I use this in conjunction with the with Insight, like we looked at in part 1. But I do like the Blue Cat meter, so I'm just going to let those hang out there. And the main thing that I'm concerned about is just we're going to turn on the VCC. So I'm just clicking that on. Haven't done anything to it yet, and we have the SSL ready to go for when we need it. Okay, that looks good there. I'm just eyeballing this up, and let's go back and make this bigger. We'll get rid of this window, and let's start talking about what we have to do now. Now, there's a few more bits of housekeeping that I want to discuss here. One thing I want to do is I want to add a drum level, so I'm going to hit right-click, add bus for. I don't really want to add it to the selected channels. I'm just going to go add bus channel. There it is. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this drum level. And I'm going to label this royal blue, because I do this with my all buses, which is something that we're going to take a look at further down the line as we mix here. But the idea is I will send everything to the drum level. So everything's going to come here. Every, for example, the drum bus here, we're going to have to route this to the drum level. And then we're going to add a few effects channels in here. That'll be for kick and snares. This will be for our parallel drum compression, and maybe 2 for our reverbs. I like to sometimes mess with a plate or a room verb just to get a little bit of sound and a little bit of natural ambiance for the drums if they don't have it. So I just set them up like that. I send all these effects to the drum level. All right, those are going to the drum level. And then what's going to happen is this is going to come down here to our all buses. I can just set these up now. We're going to need all drums. We're going to need all percussion. We're going to need our bass, all music, all vocals, all effects. So these are essentially acting as VCAs. And the reason I like to use buses for them is because I can put plugins on them down the line. If we're mixing something or sending an entire group of tracks there, I like using buses over VCAs because, for example, if the drums are a little bit, they're not cutting enough and I want to brighten them a little bit, or if I want to compress them to get a little bit more sustain and snap out of them, I can do that later down the line. That is why I use buses. Make these that royal blue color. And I'm just going to label these up. The first one I call all drums. So these are my all buses. Got all drums. This is going to be all percussion. All perk. This one I call low end. This guy's going to be all music. All vocals. And last but not least, all effects. So what I'll do with this one is I will strategically send certain effects there. And I want to make sure these are routed to the submix. So we'll do that. Okay, these are all going to the submix, and I am gonna shift click on the solo for these. I want these to always be on because everything is going to be coming to these in some capacity or another. Let's move over here to the drum level. Make sure that this is going to my all drums now that we have that set up. So everything should be good. If I hit solo now, you'll see that all of our drums light up here. They get soloed, and that's exactly what we want. So we're not going to have to do any more routing. All of our routing is now officially set up. So I realize that this is probably not the most fun part of the mixing process, but nonetheless, guys, just remember it's important. You have to stay organized and you have to manage your session, all right? So let's get rid of the mix window for now. What I want to do is I want to go in and check out the toms, all right? Before we start our static mix, before we start doing anything like that, I want to make a decision. Am I going to clean up the tom sound, or am I going to leave the mic bleed in on these? Because there is quite a bit of mic bleed on the toms. Let's see, we've got our floor, and I'm just going to label this rack just to make it less confusing. Now, the thing is, there's not a whole lot of tom activity in this song. There's a couple hits towards the end, and that's sort of why I need to figure out if we want to keep these in the session. Let's zoom in a little bit. As you can see on these 2 tracks, there's a whole lot of stuff here, and it's not very noticeable as to where the tom hits are. So on some drum tracks you get, on some sessions, you know, there might be a little bit more isolation for the tom mics and might not get as much mic bleed. But then other times, mic bleed is highly desirable for the type of music that you're mixing. So it just really all depends. Now, I happen to know that there is no tom hits until we sort of get towards the end over here. So what I want to do is listen, and let's see if the tom bleed is manageable, if it's something that we want, or if it's something that I want to take out and just leave the hits and draw some fades in and out on them. So as you can hear from that, I mean, we're hearing a pretty good image of the entire drum kit. You're hearing the kick, you're hearing the snare, you're hearing the hi-hats, and I would imagine we're going to hear the cymbals if we move to a different part. Lot of hi-hat. That would mean because I have the hi-hat highlighted instead of the floor and the rack. That would help. But nonetheless, it's a very similar sound. Those drums in that area are picking up the same stuff. So it's a pretty good sound, okay? Let's bring in the other drums and see how they sound when I take them in and out, if it's something that I'm gonna wanna use, or if we wanna edit the toms by themselves. Now again, bear with me, this is not gain staged yet, and we haven't done our static mix. We're just figuring out our tom situation now. When I take these out, I'm not missing a whole lot. So by my estimation, we're going to edit out all of the mic bleed on the toms. We're going to find where the tom hits are, and then we will sort of draw some fades in and out so that they're very smooth. All right, so like I said, I know that they are towards the back of the session here, and it's pretty impossible to just look at them and to tell. Okay, here's the rack, so we're going to solo that and see if we can't hear where the tom hit is. All right, so we have one here. And that's about there. Let's see how long it sustains for. Not very long, so we'll make an edit point here. Can always take these out. Okay, so strangely, I think there's only one rack tom hit, and it's right there where we edited, so I'm going to delete that out, and we'll delete everything ahead of that out. Now, we're going to have to look for the floor tom here. I know the floor tom is played a little bit more, like I know that's a hit right there, I think that's a hit right there, but we just need to make sure before we go ahead and delete it. All right, so we know that one's over here. Let's go ahead and edit this part. Right about there. Okay, we can splice that. No, there's nothing before this, so we'll get that out of here. Okay, so it looks like there's 1, 2 here. Take these out. Here's another one. Now, you want to make sure when you're editing toms, here's a little important tip here, is make sure you listen to how long the toms sustain for and give yourself ample tail room. So here's the hit, but I'm letting it sort of sustain quite a bit before I go back and listen to where we need to remove, or fade in and out any of the audio, because the last thing we want to do is have them sort of sound like they're getting sucked out, like, you know what I mean? Like, so it hits and then the tails sort of dive off. Get rid of that. And the reality is I'd rather leave more than I need and take it away than obviously need it and not have it. So we can clear out the end there. So let's go ahead and clean up these tom hits. I think that is the extent of them. There's a whopping 4 tom hits in this whole tune. But that's okay. I mean, they're important. So, if the drummer wanted to play them here, or if the artist whose drummer this is played them here, then, clearly they're important. So we're going to have to treat it just the same as any other parts in the tune. That actually might be a little short. The only way we're going to know that is we'll draw some fades in on the front, and we'll sort of listen to them in context with the rest of the drum kit. Let's come here to this guy, do the same thing, a little fade, and a little fade on the front. It's going to be pretty hard to hear them with everything else going on. So let's get everything else in. Yeah, so you don't really notice, a shorter tail on that. Let's listen to these. All right, so those are good for now. Let's go ahead and just keep moving on. I don't want to dwell too much on editing, but I just wanted to make a few of those points because they are important. So let's go ahead and start. Now what I want to do is I want to start gain staging this a little bit. And when I say gain staging, I mean getting our level. These are all hot. They're hotter than I want them to be. They're louder than I want them to be. So we're going to go ahead and turn them down to sort of make them a suitable level for sending into the submix to the mix bus, because we don't want to be blasting our mix bus. I would rather leave lots of headroom, turn stuff up later on. Okay, it's always easier to turn stuff up, but it's not always easier to turn things down. And I'll show you what I like to use for my gain staging. And that is, I like to use the trim tool in the VMR because I also use the VCC from Slate. So in just about every mix that I do, I use the VCC here, and I have it on the noise reduction, like I said before, on the mix bus, the 4KE, everything's pretty much right up the middle now, and I use the trim to get the level where I want it to be. Now, this is not an exact science for me. This isn't something that I say, oh my God, the drums have to be peaking at negative, blah, blah, blah. And that's just not really how I work. I like to just leave headroom, and I like to make sure that everything going down the line will have plenty of headroom. And that's also where the all buses come in, is later on down the line. If we get into trouble with having stuff be too loud, we can pull the all buses down a little bit, readjust the compressor on our mix bus, and then we're usually, in a much safer zone. So let's go ahead and unsolo these. I'm just going to start with the kick. We'll solo this, see where the peak is. Now in Studio One, it's important to leave all your faders on 0 because the more we turn this up, you're going to see the peak will come up, and the more we turn this down, you're going to see the peak go down. So we'll keep it at unity and just sort of watch where we're hanging out here. So if we look over on the left, I really don't like in Studio One. It's different. The metering is different in every DAW. All I can speak upon is what I'm doing right now. And in Studio One, I like to have my drums sort of, peaking around -12 here, because that way I know I have headroom. And, the more drums we send to a bus, right, just 2 tracks stereo, I mean, we have... how many drum tracks? 10, 11, 12 drum tracks. That's going to eventually go just be summed down to 2 tracks. So we need to leave headroom. It's at 0 right now. And before, when I said if we bring this down, it'll get quieter. Watch what I mean. So that's why I like to get my levels and gain stage before I do my static mix. So a safe assumption for me would be to, like I said, to sort of go for -12 here. Now this can change as I mix, so I'm always gonna maybe come in here and tweak the trim tool a little bit. All right, now a fast way to get this on all of the other tracks, since they're going to go there, is to click on the first one, shift click on the last, and then we're just going to drag this to all the other tracks. And as you can see, they are all on there instead of having to go one by one and then turn the trim tool down. So what I want to do now is solo everything and just see where everything's kind of peaking on the meter. And you can see now we're not clipping out the stereo bus down here. The red light's no longer on. Since we edited these toms here, I want to pan this to drummer's perspective. So hi-hats, rack tom sort of on the left, floor tom, ride on the right. That's just kind of how I like to do things. Nothing's right or wrong. You can pan audience perspective, which is the opposite. That's just really how I mix. So I'm gonna nudge the rack over to the left and the floor over to the right. Essentially, I wanted to feel like I'm sitting at a drum kit and listening, or sitting behind the drummer or playing the drums. So I'm also going to pan the hi-hat mic a little bit to the left. Just want to find the hi-hat. Let's go back to the beginning. All right, so now if we take a look at our drums and you look across the board here, you're going to notice that nothing is really, hanging out over -12 on the meter. Now, the reason I like to keep it here is because when we start the static mix, which we're going to do in 1 second, if I bring these all down, and then I start massaging the faders up one by one. And if we start somewhere like here, listen how quiet it is. So we're in a safe zone. Now I want to start the static mix of the drums. I want to get an overall level and overall balance. I want to make sure that the panning decisions I've chosen are correct, and I just want them to all sit properly. Then we'll head over and check out the DrumBuss. So let's start with the static mix, and like I said, I like to bring all these down and then literally to 0. So I start this way, and the first thing I will start on is bringing up the overheads. For me, my interpretation of drums is all built around the overheads, and everything else is just sort of like, like icing on the cake, if that makes sense. So let's bring up the overheads. So one thing I'm noticing right away is that the left overhead is louder than the right. So I'm just kind of making a little alteration to that while this is at 0 and at unity, so I can make an intelligent volume decision. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of questions like, oh man, why don't you use clip gain or the mix tool or this or that, and the reality is you can use anything you want as long as you can adjust the the volume of the track. The mix tool is great, which is right here. It's a gain knob, and you can basically do the same thing. You can lower the volume, you can increase the volume, and there's nothing wrong with that. It really is just a preference for how you want to work. The other thing you can do is we can come here and we can physically drag the volume of the track down, increase it. We can do all that stuff. But, this is just kind of how I work and how I've worked for a long time. This is how I was doing it in Pro Tools before there was clip gain in Pro Tools. I was using the trim tool, in Pro Tools. So for me, this just makes sense. It's in the VMR. I use it. Okay, so after I get the overhead balance, which I've done now, I want to come and start massaging in the kick. I'm going to leave the room mics until the very last bit. I do not want to start with the room mics. I do not want to start with the kick. I know a lot of people put the kick drum up and then they start going and building around the kick drum, but I don't want to start with the kick because the overheads give me a very big image of the drums. I can hear everything in the overheads. So I want to use my overheads as the bass tone for my drums, and then I want to supplement that with the kicks, with the snares, the toms, the rooms. So first thing I'm going to reach for after these overheads, we'll bring up the kicks. So now I'm going to solo everything else because I just want to hear the blend and the relationship of the kick in to the kick out mic. I like to get those sitting in a particular spot, and then that way if I ever need to move my kicks, I'll simply move it from the kick bus. So once the kicks are in a spot, they just kind of stay there. I'm going to turn the drum level up a little bit here just because things are a little quiet. Want to be able to hear this well. Okay, so I like the ratio of the kick in to the kick out. Now let's check out the snares. We're going to do the same philosophy here. Now, this is another reason, like I said, I was going to explain why I use this overhead room bus here, why I send the hi-hats, the overheads, and the room mics to this overhead room bus is because I can very easily turn these all on and off with the click of one button if I need to. I use my buses a lot. You're going to learn that I'm a big fan of buses. I like to bus groups of tracks to one fader if possible. That's also why I use the all buses, is because when it comes time to automate the mix at the end of the session, I can move one fader. If I want more drums, less drums, more bass, less bass, more guitars, less guitars. I can do that with one fader, and for me, that makes mixing easier. Okay, I like the way that sounds so far. Let's bring in the room center. I'm actually going to change the name of this, as we discussed in part 1, and I'm going to call this the Fat Mic, because for me, this is very much what I've set it up to be. Okay, we line the phase up to the overhead mics, which means we brought it closer, so it's not going to give us a sense of space and a sense of depth and a sense of distance, but rather it's going to give us a sense of weight and size. Size is the wrong word, not room size, but in terms of the amplitude of how the drums sound. All right, so then I'm going to massage this in with everything else. Last thing we're going to do is bring in the rooms. Let's see, why are these guys not playing? All right, so I don't know what happened there, but I had to restart Studio One, and the room mic was not playing for some reason, but now it is. So no worries. Let's continue where we left off. Okay, so the last part of this is massaging in the room left and the room right, and the reason being is I don't want to go nuts. I don't want you to hear a whole lot of room. I just want to sort of nudge enough in so that we can hear a little bit of ambiance and a little bit of depth. Okay, I really dig where that's at. Let's bring our drum level back down to unity now. I had just increased that so we could hear the drums a little bit better as we were mixing it. Let's hop on down to the to our compressor here, and let's sort of push some level in here and see how we're doing. I do not want this to move wildly. I don't want it to compress as much as if we had all the other tracks going in here, because we only have the drums going in here. Now I realize that the kick and the snares are probably the largest transients in a mix. So, we do want to see the needle just getting tickled a little bit here. At this point, that's all I want. Just like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to engage a little bit of my filters here. I typically EQ on my mix bus and mid side, and the only reason being is I like to get a little bit more extreme and aggressive with filtering my side information, and the reason I do that is so that we get more headroom down the line. So all I'm going to do is start to just bring some stuff in here, use a 12 dB per octave slope, and so if I hit this, we're only going to hear the stuff that is in mono or down the middle, and if I click this, we'll hear the side information. So let's just put a little bit of filtering on here. Nothing crazy, about 27 there, and I don't think we have enough stuff in stereo yet to make any intelligent decisions. I'll leave that at about 40, and I'm gonna come back and revisit that, but everything so far is where I want it. The Pultec, we're not doing anything with that. The drummer is off. And, oh, I actually forgot one thing. Something that's very cool inside of Studio One now, that is an integral part of what I do in my sound, is tape. I like to put tape on the mix bus. I have been using the Slate, see, I'm forgetting all this, the VTC, the VBC, the VMR, the VC. It's a lot of stuff, man. I have been using the VTC, right? And it sounds great, but I was just sent this new Softtube tape plugin. It sounds great, and what's cool is we can use it in the mix effects up here in Studio One. So that's something that I'm gonna do. If I can get it to drop down. So see, we have the console shaper, which is similar to the VCC, and it sounds great. But see, the tape multi-track, I'm gonna click on that, and this is gonna give us our tape sort of vibe, mojo, whatever you want to call it for this session. Again, I leave this alone for now. We're not doing enough stuff to really sort of tweak our mix bus yet. We can open this to drive it harder, to add some crosstalk. We can even trim the high frequency, which is really cool. But I'm just going to leave this as it opens, all right? And, you know, the GUI looks pretty cool too. So tape, VCC, and then we're just hitting the SSL a little bit. The rest of the stuff is off. Drummer's off, and the limiter is off. Again, like I said, I do not want to put the limiter on yet because I want to know if we're clipping. All right, so we got everything squared away over there. Let's head back to the drums now. So we're gonna start the fun stuff, okay? We have our static mix done. I just realized I need to get a level on the toms. I'm jumping the gun here. Let's just, let's get a rough level of these in. Okay, so we'll leave those there for now. Now what I want to start doing is I want to quickly put a couple things on our drum bus, like a little bit of EQ, a little bit of compression, a little bit of tape, and then we can set up our parallel buses. They're already set up, but I mean, like, we're going to put our compressors on there. I like to, in this particular case, I like to use a kick and snare parallel bus, and then I'll use a parallel drum bus. So I want to send the kick and the snare to its own compressor in parallel, and then I'll send all the rest of the stuff to its own compressor in parallel. I'll show you that as we go along here. So starting on the drum bus, let's move back a little bit. First thing I want to put on here is some tape. So I'm a big fan of the way the Universal Audio, it is the Ampex ATR 102, which is like a 1/2-inch tape. Now, I know 1/2-inch tape is sort of, it's used more for mixdown. Like 2-inch tape is used more for a tracking purpose, but for some odd reason, this just sounds great on buses to me, so I like using it. I'm gonna turn off the noise, turn off the wow and flutter. I don't want noise or wow and flutter on here, and I'm just gonna leave it. You know what, I'm gonna turn up the drum level again because these are just a little bit low. If we were listening to the rest of the mix with all the other instrumentation in it, you would notice, everything would seem and appear louder, especially with the parallel compression in. But for now, let's just turn this up a little bit so you guys can hear it. And again, yes, I know this is clipping, disregard it, but we don't have the limiter on, and as long as it's not audibly clipping right now, I'm not worried about it. All right, that sounds good. Next thing I'm gonna put on is an EQ. So we're gonna get our trusty Pro Q2 here from FabFilter. And then let's also get one of my favorite drum bus compressors, personally, which is the Plugin Alliance. It's the Alicia Empressor. Big fan of it. And listen, it depends. I will often use different compressors and different EQs, in different songs. It all depends on what the program material calls for. That's a huge, huge part of mixing, is choosing the right compressors, choosing the right EQs, choosing the right tape, the right harmonic sweetening for the song. I don't always say, oh my God, I love the Empressor, even though I do, but it's not like I'm going to use it on every single song just because I like the way it sounds. It has to be right for the song. So we'll grab the Empressor here. So what I want to do is it defaults to, I think, 3-1. That's cool. We'll leave it there. I want to start with a medium attack around 20 milliseconds. This release, I think, defaults to like 150, which is fine. So we're just going to start bringing in the threshold here. All right, check out how the snare sounds when I bypass this in and out. It's really sustaining the snare in a nice way. I do not want to crush and overcompress the drum bus. So all we're doing is, max like 4.5, 5 dB of compression here. It's a little hard to see because the meter goes all the way up to 20, but I think we're hitting around 4.5. Now, as I mentioned in part 1, the reason I'm starting on the drum bus here is I like to, often as possible, I like to use top-down mixing. I like to start with the most broad area of tone, of audio that I can, and I like to sculpt that, and then I like to work backwards. I realize that a lot of you, or I've seen a lot of people, they might do this. They might come here and solo the kick drum. And listen, that's not right or wrong. It's just whatever works for you. For me, the reason I don't like to do that, and this is important, is because I have absolutely no idea how I need the kick drum to sound when it's soloed by itself, not in the context of anything else. At least when I start with everything on the drum bus, I can hear the relationship of the kicks, the snares, the toms, the overheads, and the room mics. I can hear how they play with each other. And then I can make intelligent decisions. So I look at it as like, sculpting ice or pottery. Like I'm trying to cut and carve things away that I don't want or I don't need, or I'm trying to enhance things and, bring things out. And I just find I can do that better when I'm, starting on the drum bus. We have our stuff going on the mix bus. Now we're focusing on the drum bus. I'll do some broad stroke moves. We'll work backwards. We'll get to the kick bus, the snare bus, and everything like that, as you'll see. But this is a process. So we'll move these guys here. We'll keep going on the drum bus here. I want to listen now. I'm going to maybe do a little bit of EQing before the compressor, and sort of what I'm listening for is I want to see if there's any low mid buildup, any muddiness, any honkiness, cardboardiness, anything like that. And of course I want to get rid of any of the sub lows we can't hear. I usually take out everything below 30 because we're never going to hear it on anything. So check it out. Okay, so right there, around 300, I just took a guess and I just started there, but I know we get a lot of muddy buildup, a lot of honky stuff happening, 300, 200, 500 on drums. It just happens. You just know these things from doing it a lot. And so, I don't want to do any surgical stuff here, just some broad strokes. All right, so 680 and 300 is sounding a little sketchy to me, so we're going to try and pull them out. Okay, nothing crazy, right? 2.5 dB, pretty broad Q, around 2. Let's listen to that 680. It's where we get a little bit of ring on the snare, okay? I want to eliminate it at this point. That way, working backwards, when I go and address the snares at the snare bus or the kicks bus, this will already be taken care of. So if I do some subtractive stuff on the mix bus level, then maybe on the kick or the snare bus level, I can do some sweetening. Okay, I dig that. I'm going to use the auto gain function here. So if I boost something, it'll compensate by making it quieter. And the opposite if I cut. Okay, let's bring this in and out. I really hope you can hear those low mids, that little bit of honk that we're getting rid of, and especially a lot of that snare ring. So now that we're just doing a couple broad stroke EQ moves, we've got a little bit of gentle compression happening. If we take all of this in and out, we'll bypass the entire chain. Pretty big difference, right? So we've been at it for a little while. I think I'm going to call this part 2. We will pick up in part 3, where we're going to start some stuff like we're going to set up our parallel compression, and then we'll start working backwards here, checking out the kick bus, the snare bus, and then the individual tracks themselves. So this has been part 2 of mixing drums from scratch. I appreciate you guys hanging with me. I know this is a little bit longer of a series I'm doing, but it has to be longer because I want to explain all this stuff as I'm doing it. I don't want this to be a video or a video series where it's like, okay, hey, I went and I mixed this and I'm just showing you everything I did, you know, like I EQ'd that, I compressed that. I want to show you this all in real time as I'm making these decisions, what's going through my head, so that you could take this all on board and really get as much from it as possible. All right, so as always, guys, I just want to say thank you for watching. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. I hope you all have an awesome day, and I will catch you guys in part 3. See ya.